I've received a lot of requests about scumbling. It seems to be lots of confusion about this technique, even though it's been used for hundreds and hundreds of years. So let's scumble. A scumble is simply one layer of paint that goes over another layer of paint. Originally, scumble was used along with glazing, when in the early days glazing was the original way of painting with oil. The darks would be put in first with glazing, and then scumble would be put in over the glaze to create the light effects. Well, today scumble has a much wider use because we're using materials in various ways. So let's show you how scumble is done. Now, there's one effect with scumble on dry surface and another effect on wet surfaces. So I'm going to show you the dry surface first. First of all, scumbling is done with the back of the brush, not necessarily the tip of the brush. And so you load the back of the brush's belly, load it really good with paint, and the degree of the amount of paint that you put on the brush depends upon how thick you want that paint stroke to be. And so you lay that brush almost flat. If you lay it flat like that and just let it scoot along, so you get this nice scumble with the broken marks. That gives you a nice glitter. You could use that on when you're creating a surface of water where the sunlight is sparkling on the water. This sort of use of scumble can create that sparkle and works very well. If you wanted a thicker scumble, you load the brush with just a little bit more of the paint. This again is wet on a dry surface, and you would hold the brush at a little bit more of an angle and give it just a little bit more of a push, but just pull. And you pull very lightly. Now if you dig into it, it digs into the surface. So that's wet on dry. Now let's show you wet on wet and show you how that can work. So I'm going to create a little wet surface over here. Let's just, doesn't matter what color it is, we just want a wet surface on which to work. So I'll just create a little wet surface right here just to show you that. Now, I missed the brush. Scumbling is usually considered to be light over dark, but in our modern era we're using any color, any value. It simply means one layer of paint on top of the other, rather than being mixed together. So now wet on wet. When you have the wet paint, you load the brush the same way. You load it on its belly, on the back, because you're working more on its belly than you are on its tip. So get it nice and loaded. And I like holding the brush like this when I'm scumbling because it gives me more leverage. And so you simply let it glide. Now if you let it glide very slowly across the wet surface, you still get that broken area, but notice that the paint kind of makes these little triangles that extend along with the scumble, whereas you get a cleaner scumble over here if you scumble wet on dry. Now let's do that with a lot more paint. Just load it and hold it as flat as you can, and now I'm going to turn the brush and see, like that, the paint just glides over the top. The difference, and it glides over the top without mixing with that wet paint below. That's one of the advantages of scumble. And of course, now you can see the difference. If I do this, if I brush the traditional way like that, you see then the brush pulls that paint from underneath. So there's the difference between using the wet paint on top of wet paint, just with a straight brush stroke, and with the scumble stroke. A lot of people have interpreted scumble to mean this sort of thing. That's not scumble. Scumble simply means creating a layer of paint, one color on top of the other, without necessarily mixing. So there's your quick tip.